I was paying $2,800 a month to rent a one-bedroom condo in East Vancouver. In the Philippines, my wife Faye and I found a house for $380, and the part I didn't expect, the part nobody in any forum or YouTube comment section warned me about, is that the $380 house is the first place either of us has felt genuinely settled since we both stopped working. I'm 63. Faye just turned 61. We're both retired, and we're both Canadian, which means we spent the better part of our working lives being told that if you just kept contributing to your RRSP and took your CPP when the time came, everything would be fine. We did that. We were responsible. We weren't the couple who blew money on new trucks every few years, or took vacations we couldn't afford. We were careful. We saved. And then we retired in British Columbia, and careful turned out not to be enough. The problem wasn't one thing. It never is. Our combined retirement income, CPP, OAS, a small pension I'd carried from my years in the trades, came to roughly $20,100 a month. When we'd first moved into our condo in East Van, the rent was $900. That felt manageable. Not comfortable, but manageable. Then the renewal came, and it came again. Each time the number went up, always with that polite letter explaining market conditions and comparable units in the area, as if explaining it made it any easier. By the time we were sitting at $2,800, I did the math out loud at the kitchen table and told Faye that we were paying more for the apartment than we had coming in. Not almost more. More and everything else. Groceries, utilities, the car, insurance, prescriptions, the odd dinner out, came straight out of savings. Our RRSP, which we'd spent 30 years building carefully and responsibly, was going down. I did what I imagine a lot of people in that situation do. I'd sit at the table after dinner, while Faye watched something in the other room, and I'd open a spreadsheet and project forward. At the rate we were drawing down, somewhere between 10 and 13 years before it was gone. Then I'd think about what 77 or 80 looks like with nothing left, and no way to work your way back, and I'd close the laptop and lie awake. I looked at cheaper cities. There are cheaper cities in Canada. But cheaper in Canada isn't cheap when you add everything up. You save $600 on rent, you give up your city, your doctors, your proximity to family, and you're still dealing with Canadian winters and Canadian grocery prices and Canadian everything else. We needed a different kind of answer. I don't remember exactly when the Philippines first came up. I was probably watching something online, one of those channels where a retired couple walks through their house abroad and shows you the grocery receipt. I mostly dismissed it. Faye definitely dismissed it. We weren't that kind of people. I'd spent my career as a pipe fitter. Faye had worked 22 years in hospital administration. We liked hiking on the weekends. We liked knowing where things were. But the numbers kept appearing. Houses for $300 or $400, meals for $1.50, private hospital visits, and this became increasingly important the more I read, because we knew we'd eventually lose our provincial health coverage after staying away too long, that cost less than what gets charged in Canada for something that isn't even fully covered. I spent about 8 months reading expat forums, watching videos, pulling rental listings, building a real spreadsheet with real exchange rates and actual cost breakdowns from people who'd been living it. Not the optimistic version, the honest one. Faye was the harder conversation. She didn't say no, but she wasn't ready. I didn't push. I kept researching and eventually printed everything out, put it on the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, and said I wasn't asking us to move. I was asking if we wanted to go and see. We went. We spent the first month in a short-term rental while I started looking at houses properly. I had a ceiling in my head. Under 500 Canadian for housing, all in. If I could stay there, the rest of the numbers started making sense. The first few places I saw were fine. Too expensive for my target, but fine. A house in a subdivision outside the city, 2 bedrooms, air conditioning throughout, newer appliances, a guard at the gate, around 28,000 pesos a month, closer to $700 Canadian. I walked through thinking it was still less than a quarter of what we'd been paying in Vancouver, which is technically true, and also completely beside the point when you're building a budget that needs to hold for 20 years. A week later, someone connected me to a different property. Smaller road, older neighborhood, kids playing outside, a sari-sari store on the corner with a hand-painted sign and cases of soft drinks stacked beside the door. The house had 2 bedrooms, tile floors, concrete walls, a basic kitchen with a gas range and barely any counter space, 1 bathroom with a cold shower and no tub, and a window unit air conditioner in the bedroom, a ceiling fan in the living room, a small covered porch out front. Rent 22,000 pesos, about 380 Canadian. I called Faye from the porch. I said I thought I'd found it. She came to see it. She stood in the kitchen for a long time without saying anything. Then she said it was very small. It was. But I said, do the math with me right here. $380 for the house. That was the big number. Everything else, electricity, water, internet, food, getting around, was going to be a fraction of what we'd been spending. I asked her to subtract $380 from $2,800 and tell me what she saw. She knew what I was doing, but she did the math anyway. We took it. The first 2 weeks felt like something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, more like the specific relief of not waiting for the next bad piece of news. We went to the market, and I didn't calculate the yearly cost of what we put in the cart. We ate dinner at a small place around the corner for almost nothing, and it was genuinely good, and I didn't sit there converting pesos to dollars on my phone. For the first time in a long time, money wasn't the background noise of every decision. Then I learned about the roosters. I knew the Philippines had roosters. I didn't know they had opinions about what time sunrise was. The one nearest our house seemed to have decided that 4 in the morning was close enough. Then another would answer. Then a dog. Then several dogs. Faye and I would lie there in the dark, and she'd say something under her breath that I choose not to repeat. And I'd try not to laugh, because I was thinking the same thing. The heat was harder for her than for me. I'd worked outdoors in all conditions for most of my career, so heat was uncomfortable but not foreign. For Faye, it was something she had to actively manage. The bedroom was fine with the air conditioner running. The rest of the house, between about 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, was not. She adjusted her schedule. Things done early, rest through the heat, back out in the late afternoon. It took her a few weeks to find the rhythm. She found it. There were brownouts. That was the word everyone used. Power would drop without warning, the fan would stop, the internet would die, and you'd go outside to find the whole street dark, and the neighbors acting like this was a mild inconvenience, which it was once you understood that it always came back, and life simply continued in the meantime. The first time it happened, I spent 20 minutes checking our own breakers before I looked up and noticed there was no light anywhere on the block. What didn't stop, and this was the number that changed everything, was the income arriving while the expenses stayed low. At the end of our first full month, I opened my banking app and looked at the balance. Then I looked again. For the first time since we'd retired, we had spent less than we'd received. Not barely, by real money. Our income came in at $2,600. Our total spending, rent, electricity, water, food, transportation, everything, came in at just over $400 Canadian. We had more than $1,000 left. I showed Faye. She looked at the screen and then at me. That's what's left, she said. That's what's left. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same posture I'd had at ours in Vancouver, except this time nobody was opening a spreadsheet to count the remaining years. We stayed in that house for about 5 months. The kitchen wore on Faye steadily. She'd always cooked properly and found herself working in a space that barely had room for 2 pots. The bathroom was fine for me and not fine for her. The neighborhood sounds took time to become background rather than constant interruptions. We got around without a car, which took adjustment. I found that a combination of tricycles and grab cars covered most of what we needed. And on the days it didn't, it was mostly a minor inconvenience rather than a crisis. I'd spent 20 years assuming a car was simply a requirement of adult life. Here I went days without spending anything on transportation at all. About 4 months in, I met another Canadian at a cafe near the waterfront. His name was Bruce, from Calgary originally, mid-50s, 3 years in the Philippines, retired early from oil and gas. He'd had more or less the same idea we'd had and arrived ahead of us. He invited us out to see his place. We drove to a gated subdivision. Security at the entrance, manicured grass along the road leading in. His house had 3 bedrooms, though he lived alone. Proper ceiling insulation, a full kitchen, 2 air conditioners, a hot water system that ran throughout, fast internet with a backup connection, and a covered carport with a second-hand SUV in it. We sat on his terrace and Faye said it was nice. It was. 55,000 pesos, Bruce said, about $950 Canadian. I watched Faye absorb that number. I knew what was going through her head because it was going through mine. $950 sounded like a lot measured against what we'd been paying. Measured against Vancouver, it was nothing. We'd been paying nearly 3 times that for less space. No garden, no terrace, no quiet. Driving back, Faye said she'd really liked it. She said it felt more like home. I told her I understood. I understood more than I said, because I'd already started looking online before we even got back. Not seriously, I told myself. Just to see what else was out there. There were listings everywhere. Beautiful places for 700, 800, just over 1,000. Every single one was less than half of Vancouver. I caught myself thinking we deserved something nicer. We'd worked hard. We'd done everything right. We could afford it. And then one night, after Faye had gone to sleep, I sat at our small kitchen table and opened a spreadsheet, the honest kind. I started with the rent, $950. Then I added a car, because in a subdivision that size you need one for everything. Insurance, registration, fuel, maintenance. Call it another $350 a month when you averaged it out. Then higher electricity for a bigger house with more air conditioning running. Then the small ways lifestyle expands when you have more space and a nicer setup. You buy more for the house. You cook more elaborately. You eat at the restaurants nearby because they match where you're living. I looked at the total and felt something cold move through me. I'd been here before, not here, in Canada. Every time our income had increased over the years, spending had found a way to fill it. It wasn't recklessness. It was just the slow, invisible logic of lifestyle creep. You get a little more and you live a little larger, and then you're back to feeling like there's not quite enough, and you're not sure where it went. I had flown to the other side of the world to stop doing that, and I was sitting there about to do it again. I closed the laptop. I told Faye the next morning that I didn't think we should move. Not to Bruce's level. Not yet. She didn't argue, but she didn't hide her disappointment either. So we had a real conversation, the kind we probably should have had 3 months earlier. She wasn't unhappy here. She'd built a routine, made a few connections, liked the evening porch and the morning market. But the kitchen was wearing on her. The cold shower was wearing on her. The middle-of-the-day heat inside the house was wearing on her. These weren't complaints about the country. They were honest, fair assessments of what was grinding on her daily. I said I'd look for something in between. Not $380, not $950. Something that fixed what was actually bothering us without reconstructing the expense structure we'd left Canada to escape. It took longer than I expected. Several listings looked good in photos and were different in person. One place was so far outside town that a car became non-negotiable, and the savings vanished the moment I added up transport costs. One had a beautiful front room and almost no water pressure on the upper floor. One was cheap because it was directly beside a concrete mixing operation that started at 6 in the morning 6 days a week. 3 weeks later, I found a house in a quieter residential neighborhood. Not a subdivision, not the density we'd been in. 2 bedrooms, hot water in the bathroom and the kitchen, proper counter space, a working exhaust fan, a newer and quieter bedroom air conditioner, decent internet, and a shaded outdoor area where we could sit in the evening without feeling like we were on display. 32,000 pesos a month, just over $550 Canadian, depending on the rate that week. I brought Faye on a Tuesday afternoon. She walked through slowly. She opened the kitchen cupboards. She turned on the hot water tap in the bathroom and stood there for a moment. "Yes," she said, "this one. We've been here since. I won't overstate it. There are still brownouts, still some noise, still days where something needs to be fixed, and it takes longer than it would back home. But Faye started cooking properly again, which meant she was more herself, which meant evenings on the patio became something we genuinely looked forward to instead of just tolerating. Our spending settled somewhere between $1,500 and $5,900 Canadian most months, some months more. A dental visit for Faye, a trip to another island we'd wanted to see, a small repair. There are always surprises, and you have to leave room for them. The months you think are going to be average usually aren't. But even at $900, we had money left over, meaningful money. Our RRSP, which had been steadily shrinking for 2 years before we left, stopped shrinking. Then it grew. Not dramatically, but the number went up, and that changed the way I felt getting out of bed in the morning. I stopped projecting forward. I stopped doing the countdown. Our son Kyle called from Kelowna most weeks. He'd been skeptical, politely, the way grown kids are when they think you might be making a mistake, but don't want to say so outright. About 4 months in, something shifted. I think it was the first time he asked how we were doing, and I said honestly that we were good, that we weren't stressed about anything, that his mother had found a woman at the market who'd been teaching her to cook a few local dishes. He said, "You actually sound fine," like he'd expected not to believe it. I know what some people are waiting for. The part where I talk about what I miss. I do miss things. I want to be clear about that, because I've heard people who've moved abroad talk like they shed their old lives cleanly and never looked back, and I don't believe them. I miss Kyle more than I expected. I miss September mornings in BC, that specific smell. I miss Canadian Tire on a Saturday afternoon, which sounds ridiculous, but there it is. Faye misses her sister. Video calls are something, but they're not the same as being an hour's drive away. We've missed birthdays. We've missed the kind of ordinary, unplanned Sunday gatherings that you don't know you took for granted until they're not possible anymore. But memory softens things. When I start romanticizing the life we had in Vancouver, I try to remember all of it, not just the hiking trails and the friends and the familiar rhythms. I try to remember the lease renewal emails. I try to remember sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night with a spreadsheet open, calculating how many years were left. I try to remember that particular anxiety, the low grade, never fully gone feeling of knowing you were moving in the wrong direction and having no clear way to stop it. Returning to Canada permanently is possible. I want to be honest about that too. We have passports. We have some savings now, more than we had when we left. Kyle is there. We haven't ruled anything out, but returning would cost real money. First and last month's rent somewhere, deposits, furniture we sold or put in storage, a car. Vancouver is a different conversation entirely, and I know that if we went back to the same kind of life we had before, the same pressures would be waiting. My CPP doesn't get bigger because I change countries. The math doesn't change. There's a version of this story where I tell you to sell everything and book a flight because you saw a cheap house online. That's not what I'm telling you. I researched for 8 months before we went. We treated the first months as a trial, not a commitment. We kept enough in savings that leaving was always an option. We still made mistakes. I chose the cheapest house first because I was so fixated on hitting the lowest number that I didn't account for the things that were going to matter to Faye every single day. And I nearly swung too far the other way when I saw Bruce's place and started convincing myself we deserved better. The middle is harder to find than either extreme. Cheap is easy to measure. Comfortable is easy to recognize. The place where those two things overlap, where you're not sacrificing things that genuinely affect your daily life, but you're also not slowly rebuilding the expense structure you moved to escape. That takes time and honest conversations and a few wrong turns. We found it, and what I have now isn't the retirement I imagined when I was 40 and picturing the future. It's smaller, simpler. The house is modest. We don't have a car. Our lives don't look impressive by any measure I would have used back then. But I'm not doing retirement math at 11 at night anymore. Faye is cooking again, really cooking, learning things she'd never thought to try. Kyle calls on Sunday. Some days here are genuinely interesting. Some days are ordinary. That's all retirement ever really was. Ordinary days, one after another. And the question is whether you can afford to keep having them. For the first time, the answer is yes.